Welcome back to the table once again for another segment of our top 50.
Yeah, back with me and you, David.
Yeah, back with me and Ryan. We are down to our 20 to 11. Some are calling this the it before the it. Is that what we've heard?
That's what I've heard.
It's a little inside joke. If you've seen Jeremy and Emily's video, you might know what I'm talking about. But yeah, we're down to 20 to 11. This is sort of the calm before the storm.
This was tough.
It was.
This was so tough.
The whole list has a lot of good games on it, but boy, when you get down to the top 20.
Anything from my top 20 could have been in my top 10. So these games that I'm about to talk about, there's just very, very small reasons why maybe they didn't quite make it into the top 10.
Yeah, they're very close. I still have quite a variety of games, so let's get right to our games. Ryan, do you want to start with number 20?
I'll start. Number 20 for me is a little game called Heaven and Ale, which when I made this list, I probably would have said it was in my top 10. And actually, for a long time, it probably was in my top 10.
And then you went through that process on Pub Meeple?
There are some newer games that have kind of knocked it out of that spot. But Heaven and Ale is such a great game. I mean, I really love the puzzle. When we're talking about games that are puzzles, Heaven and Ale epitomizes this to a T. And you're kind of moving around this board, collecting different types of ingredients needed to make beer, which seems pretty self-explanatory. But what's really interesting is you're planting them in your fields, either on the shady side, where you're going to later sell them for money, or on the sunny side, where you'll actually harvest them for crops to increase the output of your beer.
Yeah.
And making the decision of where to plant them is super important, because you're either getting money or you're getting resources, and you need both. You have to have money because money is so tight and so hard to get. But you'll start comboing. You'll get these monks that come out because monks were actually famous for making the beer, and that's where this game kind of gets its Heaven and Ale from. And you could put monks out on your board, and they would combo and just rack in a ton of different things. And so the puzzle of where to place all these things within that spatial element is very difficult.
Yeah, the cool thing about Heaven and Ale, to me, this is one of those games too that has a scoring mechanism where you're scoring different things throughout the game, and once you score that thing, you're done scoring that thing. So there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of personal tension, but there's a lot of tension with all the other players too when you're going around that main board and going, okay, I've got to score something, or this round I could score this. I'm not going to get much for it.
$4.
But you need to go ahead and do that and score it for whatever it's worth, because you really need to pace out how you're going to score everything, because you don't want to be caught at the end and miss the opportunity to score something.
Yeah, the more things you score, you put these markers along the outside of your board, you can cash those in for bonuses.
Yeah.
So scoring something for just $4 or 4 resources, it's not great, but it puts you one step closer to completing one of your bonus cards maybe.
Yeah, but that was one of the first things I had to kind of wrap my head around, is because you naturally want to get all those things up really big before you score them.
But if everyone waits, then you're all competing for very few scoring spots. Yeah.
Right. No one's going to score. My number 20 is a more recent game. This is what I would call maybe the most accessible gateway game to date.
Okay.
And that is Cascadia. Cascadia has easily taken my spot as the gateway game. If there's ever a new group of people who haven't played a lot of games and they want to try a new one, this is the go-to because of the theme and because of the mechanics.
Yeah.
And not to mention the fact that if you're an enthusiast gamer, it's still got a lot to offer because of all those different layers of building that puzzle out in front of you and using different animal cards that are going to score differently. So there's a lot of flavors to this game.
A lot of variability.
This comes from Flat Out, who also did Calico. And Calico, I felt very similarly about, but I give this one the nod over Calico, because Calico is a little bit more suffocating and restrictive in that puzzle that you're solving, which is really fun, and I do like that. But in terms of using it as a gateway, that can be maybe a little frustrating for newer players.
Punishing. It's a punishing game.
It's very punishing. In Calico, you have to really balance a lot of things. In this one, you just have a lot more freedom. And it's a beautiful game on the table.
It really is.
Cascadia is a great game that came out very recently, and that is why it's on my list.
Yeah, we did a whole video about it.
We did.
Check that out on the channel. All right, 19 for me. This is Lost Ruins of Arnak. This is a game that came out a couple years, or 2 years ago.
Yep.
And really, really impressed me. I know that you've talked about it already on your list, and I like it for a lot of the same reasons that you do, but if you didn't watch that video, that combination of that worker placement and that deck building really works for me. But what we didn't talk about before, because I knew it was on my list, was there's this like research track that you're going up. And this to me is the puzzle of the game. Because if you can get to the top of that resource track, you're getting a ton of points. And that may be the most effective way to score points, but it's also very hard to go up that resource track. So you need to be planning, okay, what all do I need to get to the top?
Yeah.
And how am I going to get that? Because it's very rare that you'll get to the top with just resources to spare. It's always very tight. You'll always find yourself maybe even in the last 2 rounds saying, how do I eke out just that one more ruby to get up to the very top? And then when you find that way, oh, if I go here, it gives me this, which I could trade in for this card. And now I can get a ruby. And it's that very satisfying light bulb moment that really drives that game.
Yeah, that research track in late game, you can use that research track to do what you just said. The combos that are possible make things that you may not have initially thought you could do in that last turn. Like, oh, wait a minute. I thought I wasn't going to be able to do anything, but if I do this over here, and it just goes back and forth, and then that lets you go up the research track again, you might get some stuff over here. It's really interesting, and one of the core mechanics of that is you have 2 pieces that are climbing up it. Mm-hmm. And you have to, one has to precede the other effectively. So you can't just take one all the way up. Well, you could take one of them all the way up.
Yeah, then the other one
but not the other one. So the other one kind of like trails behind, if you will.
But if you get them both to the top, you get a lot of points.
Oh, yeah. It's a big opportunity to score points. And the game offers a lot of variety, especially now with the expansion.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely, that expansion kicked this game up a whole notch. Like that variable player power.
Across the board.
Everyone having the mini games, so much more variability with the cards added and the different research tracks. Now I think there's like 4 or 6 possible research tracks you can choose from. So it's a lot.
Yeah, that is a really, really good game. My number 19 is Manhattan Project.
Oh, hey.
Energy Empire. This was on Ryan's list a little earlier. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. This is from Luke Laurie, and we talked about it pretty thoroughly on that one, but I did want to add here, Luke, like we said then, he may not have come up with this concept of worker placement where players get out of sync with each other with pulling the workers back, but just so you understand that if you've never played a game like that, most games, everyone puts their workers out, everyone pulls back at the same time. This one, you're putting your workers out, but you might decide to just pull them back because what he does in his games, and in this game in particular, you're also building a tableau of cards in front of you. And when you pull back, that's when you fire off your tableau of cards, which is one of my favorite things in all of gaming. If you can build a bunch of things to do in front of you, like I want to trigger that. And it doesn't happen all the time, but in this game, there are times where you might put a worker out, put a couple of workers out, but not all of your workers. And you're like, you know what? It's a better decision for me right now to go ahead and pull back early to fire these off because it can set me up. Not to mention the fact that like fighting over those worker placement spots.
It gets intense.
It gets intense. And you can always go to a place, but you have to spend additional workers to go there if there's someone already there. So getting out of sync with each other is a complicated aspect of the game, but it's a really, really satisfying aspect of that game.
I talked about it a lot already, too.
Yes, you did.
All right, so my number 18, this answers kind of the raging question. My number 18 is Dune Imperium. So it did end up actually being slightly higher than Lost Ruins of Arnak, but they both kind of fill kind of the same spot for me. Like these games could have been interchangeable any given day. I might want to play one or the other.
Really?
They both do a lot of that hybrid worker placement deck building, right? But Dune handles it in a very different way. I would say that the deck building is the focus of Dune Imperium because as you're building your deck, as you're playing cards, it's actually telling you where you can put your agents out on the board. Every worker placement spot has a symbol, and if you don't draft or buy the right cards that have those symbols, you're not going to be able to send your guys out to those particular spaces. And this is a game that I loved when it first came out. Loved the theme, loved the IP of Dune, the movie, all of that. And all the variability of the different houses you can play and the way they interact with the boards. But a lot like Lost Ruins was highly elevated by its expansion, the Rise of Ix. This expansion just took everything I liked about Dune and made it better. And it's cemented itself on my top 50. Like I got the big box with the minis and just I could play Dune forever. And I love it for a lot of reasons I think maybe you don't, which it is the more competitive one.
This
is the direct conflict one.
This one is far more competitive. It's probably why it's not on my list, at least higher than Ruins of Arnak. That competitive aspect it's just not
Your cup of tea?
my cup of tea. Although I do respect that game, it is probably, in my opinion, the better designed game in terms of even how it combines the worker placement and the deck building than Lost Ruins. But yeah.
Yeah, it's everything can be taken from you. Your armies can be destroyed. Your allegiance with some of the guilds can be taken from you.
It's a high
causing you to
conflict game.
lose points. So yeah, I get that.
There's conflict in it. So if you don't like conflict, just keep that in mind. My number 18 is very unique for my list.
I'm interested.
It's not a board game that comes in a box. And it doesn't have a rectangular or square board.
Okay.
It has a round board, and you flick things on it, and it's Crokinole.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
We had a conversation before we came up with our top 50s about like what qualified as a board game. And it's interesting because we have varying opinions on whether some collectible card games are on those lists, things like Crokinole. But we agreed that this would
Yeah, I mean,
qualify.
it has a board. You have pieces on the board. It's definitely a dexterity.
It's a tabletop game, so we're counting it. But Crokinole, if you haven't played it, this is a dexterity game that just completely took me by surprise because I'd seen it for years and years at conventions being played. Because as it does, if you've ever been to a convention, you've probably seen a bunch of them set up somewhere being played in a tournament or something like that. We had a local con, and someone in the tournament that year had dropped out, and one of the tournament organizers was like, "Hey, David, would you sit in on this?" And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And from the moment I tried it, I was in love. I have my own, of course now I have my own board and everything. It is a great dexterity game. If you've ever enjoyed things like billiards or pool and sort of the angle or shuffleboard, things like that, there's a lot of really interesting scoring technique to this game, way more than I thought. Because I think a lot of people who are not initiated would just think, well, you're just flicking discs around.
That's what I thought before I ever played it.
I mean, it's far more subtle than that. And even the technique of flicking them, I mean, if you've ever watched the hardcore really good guys play, it's insane. Like, they're just nailing that center spot time and time again.
That's crazy.
But yeah, Crokinole, such a good game. If you ever have a chance to play it, if you see it on a table and you have that opportunity, give it a try.
And it leads to some really exciting moments, too.
Oh, yeah. Just a blast.
All right, number 17 for me is one of my favorite two-player games of all time, and this is Watergate. When this game came out, it was like at Origins a few years ago. We got a preview copy, and I think we actually played that preview copy to death. I mean, we played so many games of Watergate, teaching it to everyone that would play it at Origins. I literally brought it to one of the game nights and just played Watergate with anybody that would play with me. I play this game constantly still. I have a friend, and I've talked about this in the channel before. We play this game anytime we get together and like the two of us are just waiting for another game to open. We get out Watergate and we always play the same roles. I always play the editor.
Really?
He always plays Nixon. Because we've gotten to a point now where we know those roles so well that we know the game. We know exactly what cards are in the game. We know exactly what strategies our opponent might try to use. And I know like what my opponent's strategies are. I know what kind of cards Nixon has available in his deck. So knowing that and getting to that level of Watergate has changed the game.
That is a different level. When you're playing a card and you're thinking to yourself, I hope he doesn't have this
right.
card
I
in
know
his
he
hand
has a
right
card
now.
that can cancel this. I know he has a card that can make me discard, so I should play this one before he discard. Like, so you start to think about that very differently. And, when you're thinking about your strategies, like, okay, well, he likes to circle Nixon with bad evidence, so I can never connect to him. I'm going to make sure that he can't do that by placing an evidence token early. And there's just a lot of that back and forth that you get from playing that same role. But Nixon and the editor play very different.
Oh, yeah.
So when you're playing this game, you have basically a different game you're playing, a different thought process and mentality that has to go into your decisions based on which side you're playing.
Yeah, this is another game, even if you're not interested at all in Watergate, which I
wasn't even alive
That's
back
a
then,
pretty
so.
short list of people who are like, I'm an avid Watergate fan. But if you haven't tried the game, give it a chance because it is one of those games where you're like, oh, this is really interesting. It might even make you think, oh, I want to know a little bit more about Watergate.
Well, I definitely learned a lot more about Watergate to the point where I watched, was it All the King's Men? Is that the...
No,
All the President's Men.
All the President's Men.
All the King's Men.
Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman.
Right, and I watched that movie and I'm like, they're saying names and I'm like, I know who that guy is.
Yeah, well, they're on the cards. I mean, not those actors.
That would be cool,
but
though.
the actual people.
There was like the All the President's Men version
Woodward
of Watergate.
and Bernstein.
Yep, that's it.
My number 17 is one that I don't know if it's on your list because we haven't recorded all of our things, but I can't imagine it's not. And that's Grand Austria Hotel. Grand Austria Hotel is a big favorite of ours, a lot of ours here. This is a dice drafting game. Probably not the first dice drafting game, but it was the one that really put dice drafting for me front and center. And it's really, really approachable from a thematic standpoint. This is a very medium weight Euro that you can get to the table with just about anyone because anyone can sit there and relate to like, oh yeah, you're opening hotel rooms, you're serving people, waiting for their hotel rooms, then you're putting them up in your hotel. All those things are things that people can kind of like, okay, I've stayed at a hotel, I've eaten food.
Right, I know how this works.
So and then the dice drafting is just a really, really good mechanic. Now a lot of people have said, oh, this game, the snake draft is problematic at 4 players. Truth be told, I've played it mostly at 2 or 3. So that hasn't been as big of an issue, but I really still don't think that's a huge issue. And I know they've done some things since.
I obviously stopped using the snake draft a long time ago.
Oh yeah,
there was a point where somebody in BGG actually did the math, and they pointed out to the designers and said, "Look, doing the snake draft doesn't actually help affect your chances at all." And then the designers looked at that and said, "Oh, you're right. If you don't want to play the snake draft, just go around the table." And they believed in it so much that when the expansion came out, they actually said, don't do the snake draft anymore. The new tiles are just 1, 2, 3, 4 around the table. And it makes the game so much smoother, so much better. You're never really waiting a long time for your turn. I played that way for a long time anyway, before the expansion came out. But it's nice that it's actually codified into the rules now.
It's canon now, everybody.
Right, and it was interesting, all the breakdown of like the guy coming on BGG. And that also goes to show like, you could play test the game 1,000 times, but one person that has a really different outlook can actually go back and find new things out about a game. That was very interesting.
Yeah, but Grand Austria Hotel is my number 17.
All right, my number 16 is another deduction game. I've had some on my list already, but this is maybe my top of the line deduction game. That is Search for Planet X. I love Cryptid. I talked about Cryptid in my last video. Cryptid has one flaw that we actually discussed, which is if somebody messes up with their information, it can derail the entire game and basically make you have to restart the game. Search for Planet X uses an app. And so you will never get wrong information from a player. Nobody's actually giving information. So you can never have a game that's messed up because somebody doesn't really quite understand their clues. But Search for Planet X has that similar deduction feel. You're all trying to find Planet X. You have a number of different space sectors that have different astronomical entities, planets and asteroids and stuff like that. But Planet X is hidden somewhere, and every game there's going to be a different amount of criteria that's going to determine where Planet X is, and each player at the table is going to get just a little piece of information like, oh, it's 2 spaces away from a comet or something like that. But you can actually like change your difficulty level so the person that's more experienced with the game gets less information to start with.
That's cool.
And so you might not really, but so you're getting like 3 clues because you've never played the game before. I'm not getting any clues to start with because I've played the game so many times. And you're trying to get that information by taking these actions during the game, but also you're able to kind of make guesses along the way. Okay, like I think that there's like a nebula here. I'm going to put my marker out there. And I've never seen a game that feels, it's almost like Clue. Do you remember like Clue? Sure. Where you'd get a piece of evidence and you'd be like, oh, if that's that, then that can't be that.
Sure.
And this is like on a huge level. So you're like, oh, well, if that's a comet there, then that means there can't be another thing next to it and this can't be there.
Yeah, the way everything is connected around the circle really helps that because you're, again, like many of these games, it has that very Sudoku vibe where you're like, okay,
that's a good way to put it, Sudoku vibe.
Yeah, you process of elimination and like, okay, oh, well, that rule makes it so this rule creates this situation. And even when you figure that out, that determination might help you even figure out more, which is a really satisfying thing. It's very like Sudoku.
You might go from knowing where one thing is on the board to knowing where Planet X is from just like one piece of information that just triggers a
snowball.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, it has to be here. It's a really cool moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. My next game is not a deduction game. I need to play Search for Planet X a little bit more.
You need to play it a lot more.
I like Cryptid a little bit more. But my next game is neither. My next game is a game that we play almost as much as Don't Mess with Cthulhu at conventions. Maybe even more in some cases, and that is Time's Up.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
I wanted to split this between Time's Up and Monikers. Effectively, they're both the same game as it relates to my experience. It just depends on whether someone has a copy of one or the other,
Right.
wherever we're at. They play very similarly. I gave Time's Up the nod because the Time's Up rules are the rules that we use when we play either, which are slightly different than monikers. But you're effectively, if you've never played, going through a list of cards 3 different times until the teams have all guessed the cards. And in the first round, you're basically describing it in any way you want. There's no rules you just can't say the word.
Right.
Then once all the cards are done, you're doing it again, 1 word, 1 guess. And then in the third round, it's just basically charades, no speaking, and they get a guess. So it's a really fun game, and I've played this with big teams, and I've played it where it was just me and one other person versus another team of 2, and even that was fun, although there was probably some drinks involved. But still,
There might have been.
still very fun game. Time's Up. If you haven't played it, you've got to play it.
All right, this 15. We're on to 15, right?
Yep.
15 for me is Maracaibo. This is a Pfister game, one of multiple that may be appearing on my list. But I think Maracaibo is a fantastic game. I mean, the theme of this game is great. Little tidbit of information though. You know that Pfister themed this game after watching one of our Chit Chat episodes. I don't know if you
Really?
knew that, where we had talked about themes we wanted to see in games, and we said, why is there no great Euro game that's like Pirates of the Caribbean as a Euro? And so he was working on a game design, and this is true. He actually tweeted us about this at the time, which is really cool. Not why I love the game. I think the game is just really solid, but it is a great Euro that simulates that kind of Pirates of the Caribbean feel. You're sailing around the Caribbean, stopping at all these different ports, building up your crew in the form of these crew cards that you're playing out, and doing just a variety of different actions that are variable. So every action spot has a different tile that comes out. You're going to war with for some of the different factions that were active in that time period. And you're basically moving around this rondel. And every time you do the rondel, you do more actions because you're putting out these people, and you can stop at the people and you can take their actions as well. So the board is always changing. And there's a little bit of a race element to it, as one player can just speed ahead and in the round early when you're just still kind of puttering about. So there's just a lot that goes into every game of Maracaibo. Plus there's like a storyline that you can play out too, where you're actually adding tiles to the board every game and like having a narrative that makes you make decisions. It's very interesting.
That was really cool, and I haven't seen a lot of it since, but that was the biggest hook for me when that game first came out, was that campaign aspect of playing and having things change. It literally comes with all these little boards of different shapes and sizes that you're putting and covering up islands or different spaces. There's new cards and stuff that are getting added to the thing that give it a little bit of a narrative. It's still not a highly narrative experience.
No,
but it is a really fun
it has a
evolving Euro, which is something that was really unique.
And I think it's worth pointing out that the expansion has since come out. There was a little bit of controversy with the game, of course, like the theme of that like colonization of the Caribbean. But I think that they came out with an expansion. They addressed some of this by giving you actually the option to fight against the colonizing agents as well, which actually adds an interesting twist, because now you're having to decide, do I fight for these countries coming in and colonizing, or do I fight against them? And both decisions give you different rewards. And of course, there's a whole storyline now based on that. And also the expansion gives variable player powers. So I'm definitely into that.
Variable player powers. How can you ignore that? My next game, and this is number 15 for me, is another big one. This is Terraforming Mars.
Yeah, classic.
Terraforming Mars. There's not many people who don't like Terraforming Mars, though there are.
There's some.
Though there are. Even some people at MVM.
That's true.
Who aren't big fans. But Terraforming Mars, I remember the year this came out, we were really excited to get it at Gen Con.
Yeah. It was like the big Gen Con
release.
It
was the big Gen Con release. And even though, it may not look perfect, at least on day one, they've definitely done a lot to make it look a lot better. But this game is such a great tableau building game. I mean, if you want to talk tableau builders, this is probably the one. Like, I don't know that I've played another game where I ended up with more cards.
I mean, you have just a sea
sitting
of cards
in front of me, doing all sorts of different things. This is one of those things that I really love about games, is where you do a thing, and I get to trigger all of my X cards, and that taps, and that gives me this, and now I can spend this. So you can create a lot of combo situations there. And the whole concept of raising those 3 categories in the game, being the things that ultimately end the game, I think is a really cool cycle. Not to mention kind of like Underwater Cities, that whole thing where you're going through a round and then there's a production where you get all your stuff. Those games where you like get a ton of things.
It feels good.
Spend all those things as efficiently as you possibly can. Get all the things again, or more, hopefully.
Yeah.
That just feels good.
Well, it's a really good feedback loop.
Yes.
And you're not wrong. I especially like love the blue cards or like the action cards that give you kind of benefits, and you can like really create some synergies between like your variable corporation and those blue cards that like help you along that path. There's definitely some corporations that I like more than others.
Oh,
but
me too.
The game
I like
is
the
just
one.
So much fun.
I don't remember their name, but the ones where you can spend heat in place of money.
Is that Helium?
Yeah, I think it's something like that. Any variable player power that allows me not to worry about something.
Right.
That's the way I
Makes
usually
it a little
go.
easier.
It's the way I usually go because I'm like, okay, I don't want to have to think as hard as everyone else, so that I've taken something out of that equation. So yeah, Terraforming Mars. That's my number 15.
All right, 14 for me is Rococo. This is a game that on paper you might go, huh? It's a game about making dresses. That is what you're doing during the Rococo period. However, this is one of the Euroiest Euros that I've ever played, and the theme actually really works for me in what you're doing, because this concept of making dresses, okay, but you have to like collect the right kinds of fabric. You have to collect like lace and frills and things like that to add to your dresses, and you're all competing over making these dresses by playing cards. And that's really the key thing that makes this game so interesting to me, is it is a deck builder. You're actually gaining better versions of cards and learning when to like fire people out of your hand. Every card in your deck represents one of the workers in your employee, and the entire theme of the game is based around this big ball that the king is holding. And so you're trying to send people wearing your dresses into the ball. So you can actually create these dresses, loan them out to royalty or aristocrats for them to wear to the ball, or you can sell them for money that's going to help fund your dressmaking. And you can, beyond that, even like fund decorations. You can fund a fireworks display, all this stuff that you can spend your money on, all kind of designed around this ball. And as you play it, as you start to fill up this ballroom, it's a multi-story palace, it just starts to look gorgeous.
Well, especially the newest edition. I mean, both editions are really good, but Eagle Gryphon did a new deluxe edition, which is absolutely beautiful. The cool thing about the deck building, in my opinion, when Ryan says deck building, if you're not familiar with the game, this isn't like a massive deck you're building.
No, it's a small deck.
You've got a tiny little deck of cards. So it's a really interesting thing where when you cull a card out of that deck, it feels far more significant because it's just one of a few cards.
Like maybe 15 cards.
Yeah, it's not many cards that you have. So it is a deck management game significantly as you take one here and there and then get rid of some. Really interesting. It's been a while since I played that.
It's worth a replay, especially if you can get that deluxe edition from Eagle Gryphon. It looks, it's so good. It's so good.
All right, so my number 14 is one that has come out very recently, and it's compared a lot to my last game, Terraforming Mars, by many. And some say, what? It's nothing like Terraforming Mars. I tend to believe that it does give some of those same feels. It is Ark Nova.
Well, that definitely gives Terraforming Mars feels for me.
Ark Nova is probably the biggest release. If you're watching this video in 2022, it's probably one of the biggest releases, if not the biggest release in recent memory. Everyone seems to have a copy now, or if they don't, they want a copy. This is kind of a little of the feels of Terraforming Mars, and for me, a little of the feels of Underwater Cities, in that you're building something right in front of you as well. In this case, it's a zoo, which is also a theme that I think is very easy and accessible to a lot of players. Is the game accessible? Maybe not.
It's a little on the heavier side.
It's a little on the heavier side, but that theme helps a lot. And it also, as I've said before, has a massive stack of unique cards that is just a delight to go through. Now, just like Terraforming Mars and other games of this ilk, some of the big stacks of cards can turn into a I'm not getting the cards I need situation, but I don't care. I just love going through that deck and seeing cards. Like I could play this, you could play this game 4 times and still not see a card.
But that's what I like about it. I like that you can't just, I'm not getting the card I needed. Well, then you shouldn't be trying for that. Look at what's available, build your strategy around what's available.
Yeah, it's tactical.
Right, and what I really like about that element of Arc Nova. The cards that you're using to take your actions.
Oh, yeah.
Like the fact that they cycle and that your actions become more powerful as they go, and that you can actually level up your actions. It just means that you're playing very different strategies every game. You're playing very different games, because some games you might be upgrading certain action cards that you're not upgrading the next time you play.
Yeah, the action selection, and I'm sure we'll have talked about this game on many
I bet it's on other people's
our
lists.
other videos. I won't go into detail, but that action selection, which is like Civilization New Dawn,
A little
kind
bit.
of, where you have cards that are like you're
Yeah.
firing them off at a certain level, and then they go back to the bottom of the,
a great
the
mechanic. I
order.
love it.
It is a really good mechanic mixed with all the other things that it's got going on. I love it all.
Well, this is another one like Heaven and Ale too, where you have these scoring cards out in front of you, and your instinct is to just save up until you can get the most points. But sometimes it's worth it to score very little just so you can start to get ahead on the scoring track, because it gives you bonuses. And the earlier you get those bonuses, the better it's going to be, the more cumulative they're going to be. But that's a really hard thing to grasp. Like, it's okay to just score just a few points over and over again.
Yeah, it is an interesting game. I'm sure you've probably played it if
Or
you're
heard of
watching
it,
this
at
video,
least.
but if you haven't, try it right away.
All right, my number 13 is Azul. This is a game that I have loved for a long time. I've loved all the different versions of Azul, some more than others. But definitely like the base Azul is just still such a satisfying game to me. And the fact that you can play it in so many different ways. You can use that board where everything just has a place, or you could flip to the other side of that board where you're drafting tiles and putting them into a pattern of your own design. Again, like Sudoku, making sure that there's only one of each thing in the column and row, or in each column. So you kind of have to like really plan out how you're building that out. But Azul can be played in a very friendly way, where everyone just kind of do their own thing.
It's never played in a friendly way.
Or you could play it a very hate drafty way, where you're just more trying to block other people from the top. And it's just interesting that you can approach it with these two very different strategies. And you can do really well even without ever hate drafting against someone.
Yeah.
Or you could just hate draft all day long, and everyone just kind of plays into that.
Yeah, as you may know, we're not nasty players.
I don't
here.
really ever hate draft.
I don't, but Azul is definitely a game that invites it. Like when you're looking down there, especially if you're playing a game like that at two players.
Oh, yeah, two
you're
players
looking at,
for sure.
There may not be anything out there that's like super compelling to you. So the first thing you're going to be looking at is what's compelling to my opponent.
Right.
So hate drafting is a real thing.
Don't do it when you're teaching the game.
No, I wouldn't do
Just
that.
let them play, because this is a great game. I think David mentioned this when he was talking about Azul. It's a great game to bring in people. I've taught it to almost every family member. Multiples of them now own Azul because it's just so easy to play.
I've got family members who aren't really gamers, if you will. They have like maybe 10 games or less, and Azul is probably usually one of them. So my number 13, completely different and a much better game than Azul.
Much better.
It's Azul Queen's Garden.
Such a difference.
Azul Queen's Garden, this is higher than Azul for me. If you've watched our other videos, Azul is already on my list. Azul's Queen's Garden is the first Azul. This is sort of the fourth, if you will, Azul that has been released.
I like to think of it as the first of Azul 2.
It is, exactly. It is the most different and unique Azul yet, in that it still has a lot of the sort of connective tissue and DNA of all those other ones. But those first three play very similarly in their core mechanic of how you're drafting things. This one changes it up, and I think better than Sintra tried to do, this one takes the Azul model up to that more medium weight gamer area. For sure, because this is probably, well, not probably, it's certainly a less accessible game than the original Azul, but this is a more satisfying game for the enthusiast gamer, and that's probably why I have it higher on my list. It adds a few different elements where you're not only taking tiles, but you're also taking sort of the tiles that go under the tiles, if you will, eventually, and the staggered approach to how those things come out as opposed to all of them coming out at once. That reveal I really enjoy.
Yeah.
Now, that does involve a little bit more chance, because someone could take a tile and then reveal something that's perfect or really good for the other player. But I don't mind that. I actually like a little bit of that in my games, and that is probably one of the big reasons why Queen's Garden is here on my list.
All right, number 12 for me. Now, I talked about Watergate being one of my favorite two-player games. This is my favorite two-player game of all time. That is Seven Wonders Duel.
Oh, yeah.
This game is so easy to get to the table. It's so much fun. It has all of that same feeling of Seven Wonders, of like building out your little kingdom, or like getting all your resources and then constructing those wonders. All of that in a two-player game that, while it is combative, it doesn't ever really feel bad. I mean, you are trying to block each other and hate draft, but there's a very limited supply of cards. And whenever you're taking cards, even if you're hate drafting, you're possibly revealing more cards for your opponent. So while you think you might be hate drafting from them, you're flipping over new cards that may even be better for them that you just inadvertently gave them. So it becomes this game of like, well, who wants to be the one to take that card? And then
no one wants to flip for the other person,
right.
ever.
And then, of course, expansions came out that I think made the game even better. That Pantheon expansion.
Pantheon's great.
Which gave all those different god cards and gave you some powers you could activate to change up the game. It's just a great two-player game. I mean, that feeling of back and forth. There are other games that have come out that have kind of borrowed what Seven Wonders Duel has done, like the Lincoln Assassination, which is a game I also really like. But I'm giving the nod to Seven Wonders Duel because that is the classic one that I think will always have a place in my list forever.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, this is probably one of the rare occasions in board gaming history, if you will, where a game of such significance, the original Seven Wonders, was followed up with the two-player version, if you will, which is so different in many ways, but also, like you said, similar, and has been surpassed by this two-player edition.
I agree.
Because I believe Seven Wonders Duel, not just with us, but even on just BGG in general, the greater community, is got a higher ranking for most people than the original Seven Wonders, which is still a great game and a revolutionary game for its time. I mean, this is sort of the quintessential drafting game. It was one of the first.
And it also, I'm pretty sure it was the first duel. Like Seven Wonders Duel. We've had other games like Fox and the Forest Duel.
A lot of those happened.
Duel. A lot of them came out. They saw what Seven Wonders Duel did. And while I do like those games, I think that this was the grandfather of them all.
Yeah, I would agree. So my number 12, Ryan's going to have to stop me talking about it, I'm sure.
All right, I'll stop you right here.
Okay, I'll start.
All right, what is it?
What's your 11? No. My number 12 is Cthulhu Death May Die.
Oh, yep, here it goes. He's going to tell one of 12 stories, maybe all 12 stories.
I might. What order do you want them in? No, Cthulhu Death May Die, I've talked about it a ton on the channel, so I will try to limit it here. But I'll say it again. I've not once ever had an experience with this game that wasn't thrilling and a blast for everyone playing. And that includes those times when you play this game and someone dies almost immediately. Because that's hilarious, first of all. And if everyone's willing to just reset and do it, because a reset at that point is not hard. It's moving your guys back to the first room. And then if you can take that second experience where usually that's a new player and they're like,
don't run into that room this time.
Maybe let's dial it back a little bit and taking things a little bit more cautiously. And then getting to that end. Almost every time we've gotten to the end, it's come down to the wire. And it's in some cases come down to one individual die in one roll at the end where everyone at the table had died except this one last character who is left. And even though there's player elimination, it's usually late in the game, we're all still invested.
Yeah.
And win or lose, it's just a blast. And I like the theme. Like, I know there was a while in board gaming, sort of in the mid 2015 era, where Cthulhu this and Cthulhu that all over the place, still today. And I never really got into that as a theme, but between this and things like Arkham Horror, I really, really enjoy it. And the narrative, the way they roll that out with the episodes in this, is so good. So yeah, Cthulhu, I may just raise it on my list while I'm talking about it here, but it is currently my number 12 game.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of joking when I said that you had like 12 stories to tell, but I think that's not really a lie. I mean, the thing about the game is that it lends itself to these epic moments that you just have to go tell people about. You're like, you'll never believe what happened in our game of Death May Die. Like,
and why that's so easy is there's so many characters in the game. You can easily remember distinctly the different experiences because there's one time I played Rasputin, and there's another time I played Albert Einstein, and those little
what other game can you even
those
say that
touchstones are all you need to remember exactly what happened to that game. Yeah. Because some of it can be so thematic where Albert Einstein is finding a beaker and this ammonia and combining them to make a bomb like Albert Einstein does. But it made sense, and it was so everyone at the table was like, "Oh, that's hilarious! Albert Einstein's throwing around science bombs." Anyway,
it lends itself to great moments.
That is my number 12. Cthulhu Death May Die.
All right, my number 11 was on my top 10 list for a long time. It got bumped out to 11 just barely. This probably could have been anywhere on my top 10 list. That is Gloomhaven.
Wow.
You probably heard of it. It is the #1 game on BGG.
It is.
It's digital implementation. There's the board game version. There's Jaws of the Lion. I want to talk just briefly because I'm sure you've heard about Gloomhaven.
Maybe.
But I love the card play of this game. I love having that tactical experience. It feels a lot like playing a role-playing game without a GM, obviously, but having to make these really, really difficult tactical decisions with a very limited pool of cards that as you play will be able to be upgraded. And forgetting all about how cool the combat is and how cool the card play is, the fact that your character is given a journey. Each character has goals that they're trying to do, and as you're playing through the narrative of the actual game, your character is undergoing their own narrative as well. And as you kind of reach the end of that character's story, you can retire them. And based on how you retire,
cool.
you retire that character and you get to open up new characters, new boxes, new people join your mercenaries. Now, at this point, I know everything. There's no secrets left. But at the time, if you don't spoil it for yourself and you're just like staring at these boxes, you're like, what are in all those boxes? What kind of cool character classes am I going to come up with? And every time you grab one of those boxes and you open it, you're like, oh man, like this deck is awesome. And Frosthaven coming out is going to give you that same feeling. People have been pretty good about not spoiling it all. Yeah, and Frosthaven with being able to build out your actual Frosthaven camp. But that feeling of exploration in Gloomhaven of like, you put a sticker on. Oh, what's there? Let's go investigate. Flip to another section in the book. Oh, now we're on this whole storyline. And the way that these weave in and out of each other, little bits and pieces of storylines can be picked up in different places and they'll kind of come together really well. Like, it's not just a great tactical experience. It is a fantastic narrative experience. I wish I could go back to a time when I was exploring it all for the first time.
Well, I can because I've only played a little bit of Gloomhaven. We kind of dabbled in it, if you will, when it first came out. And I played, I don't know, just five sessions of it. Now, I do have Jaws of the Lion. I played a couple of that, but we could probably just reset and start that over, which I feel like I'm going to dedicate myself to doing with Jaws of the Lion because I really loved that experience of the tutorial aspect of learning how to play with Jaws
of the Lion walks you right into it. And if you are one of the backers, one of the many backers who backed Frosthaven, and you never played Gloomhaven, this is the time right now to play Jaws of the Lion because while Frosthaven will be different, you'll have enough of a foundation after playing Jaws of the Lion that you can walk right into playing Frosthaven.
Well, my number 11, I would call the most thematic cube pusher ever.
Okay.
Because it's Vindication.
Oh, that really is a cube pusher.
Vindication, at its heart, is just a cube pushing Euro. Really, you're just
combining cubes.
You're combining different resources to achieve things. But the theme that they apply to all of that and the way it looks on the table, you'd look at the table and swear that it's some sort of
style.
That's
what I go with.
Ameristyle, very good. Ameristyle game. You look at it and there's all these things and you're like moving around and like there's geography in front of you on this board. But you're fighting monsters, you're recruiting people, all these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you're really just collecting these various resources, which represent sort of characteristics.
Right.
They're not like,
wood
stone and wood. They're characteristics. So
courage is one,
courage,
right?
things like that. And a couple of them combine into sort of a combined characteristic. You use these resources to do all these things, collecting cards, defeating monsters. Yeah. And it is an incredibly thematic experience. The game also offers an insane amount of content.
It is insane. It's crazy. How many
even
modules?
Before all of the new stuff that has come out since, all of the modules that were involved in that original game, I've never played with all of them because it's too much. There's a lot of modules going on there, and if you have them all, it's going to cover this whole table. But man, Vindication, it's one of my favorite games. As soon as I played it, I was like, wow, it would have been in my top 10 of that year had it come out a little sooner.
I need to play more of it. I really like what I've played of it. I really like what you were saying about like getting the cards and there's all those different decks and those like tiles that you're taking do different things and you can like fight monsters like you said, but you can also like recruit helpers and like you're basically creating like a tableau. Like that's what you really enjoy. And you're triggering these, but what's cool is like each one of those assistants or support characters basically has a lifespan, and once they're done, they're done.
Yeah.
And you have to find new ways of like activating them, and it's just a very interesting puzzle.
Yeah, you're balancing them getting exhausted. There's, like I said, it's a cube pusher.
Yeah.
There's cubes going
They
everywhere
are.
on the table.
They
But
really are.
Vindication is the most thematic cube pusher I've ever played, and that is why it's my number 11, which is the last title of this list.
Top
the next
10.
one coming up is going to be our top 10 of all time. It is me, it is Ryan, it is Emily, it is Jeremy, going through from 10 to 1, all of us. I don't know how long it is, but it's probably
It's gonna
longer
be
than
long,
this one.
but it'll be worth it.
But it will be worth it because I can tell you there are some crazy games on that list. If you've been in our Discord and you've seen anything prior to viewing these videos, you'll know everyone's hotly anticipating whatever Emily's number 6 is.
We'll see.
And we'll see what it is when you watch that video. But if you have any comments or anything about our list that we shared here today, make them below. If you agree, if you disagree, if you have some titles that would be on
You
your...
definitely have to agree. These were great games.
I mean, we were down to pretty low on the list, so we're getting to some
Yeah.
really good games. Not to mention, we've had some great games all across our top
true.
50. But definitely make some comments below. We'll get down there and interact with you. Until next time, though, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.